message. I don't think we'll leave it alone.
No, it'll be on your phone, and there'll be a link, and if you push that link on your phone, it'll take you straight there. You don't even have to do anything. If you put your finger on the link, it'll light up and you'll go there. Easy.
I like it.
There you go. If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn it to the 23rd chapter of Luke. This is where we'll be spending our time. This is a portion of the gospel wherein, and there are a lot of portions like this, but this is a portion of the gospel where a lot of things are happening all at once. Some of them are natural things that are just happening in history that really would be unremarkable in some ways. Some of them are supernatural things that are coupled up with the natural, and some of the things that are natural that are happening are actually supernaturally given to happen. So what we're seeing here in this moment, in this portion of the gospel narrative regarding the life of Jesus, is an anchor in history being set. So let's take a look at this text. I'll begin reading in verse 44. It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole of the land until 3 p.m., because the sun's light had failed. The temple curtain was torn in two, and then Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And after he said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion who was there saw what had happened, he praised God and said, "Certainly this was an innocent man." All the crowds that assembled for the spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, went home beating their chests. And all those who knew Jesus stood at a distance watching, and the women who had followed him from Galilee saw all of these things. Lots of witnesses. Some of them are very engaged in what's going on. Some of them are indifferent. Some of them are participants. But this is the moment when Jesus' earthly work culminates. It comes to the head in the scripture, the arche. It comes to the moment wherein all of it's going to be stitched together for human history in its relationship with God. Did you know, and I didn't know this till just a few years ago, that this moment and the two natural events that occurred are recorded in secular history? Did you know that? The earthquake and the eclipse. Both of them are recorded by secular historians. Think about this. There's a writer, a Greek author from Caria named Phlegon, who wrote around the 120s, 130s AD, chronicling something totally disrelated to the crucifixion. He was chronicling the 202nd Olympiad. On the day that he chronicles the 202nd Olympiad, which is the day of Jesus' crucifixion, there was an earthquake that destroyed all through Mesopotamia. He records Bithynia and Nicaea as being wrecked by this earthquake, and that there was an eclipse that lasted from noon till 3 in the afternoon. So this is not, when we read our Bibles, we see some of these things and we think, it gives me chills just to think about it. We see some of these things and we think, oh, it's just a matter of faith. No, it isn't. It is a matter of faith. There's a leap that you and I have to make where we say, I believe that what happened with Jesus on the cross is effective in my relationship with God, that I'm freed from my sin. But it's not something that we just made up. It's something that happened in time and space history. That's very important. I think it's important not only for an unbeliever, but for a believer. Now, there was a supernatural occurrence here too. The veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom when Jesus died. When he breathed his last, the scripture records that the veil, now what's the veil? In order to understand the significance of it, you've got to understand something of the temple. What is the temple? The Jewish temple was like an onion. If I can quote Shrek from his movie. It's like an onion. It's got layers. You've got the outer porch where Peter and his followers after Pentecost, began preaching the gospel. The court, it's called the Solomon's porch. It's the outer layer. It's like a sidewalk all around. Anybody could gather there, whether Jew, Gentile, didn't make any difference. You could be on that porch, but there'd be a doorway and there was a wall. And on the sign, there was a sign written in several languages on the wall that said, unless you're Jewish, if you enter here, you enter under the penalty of death. And the Romans allowed the Jews that penalty. On that one instance, they were allowed to enforce that rule. And it said it was the court of the women. So Jewish men and women could go through that doorway off the porch into the first layer beyond the porch. Then there was another sign inside that said the court of the sons of Israel. The women couldn't go through there, but the men could. Then there was another sign that said the court of the priests. You had to be a member of the priesthood to go in there. If you were just an average Jew like Peter, you couldn't go through that doorway. Then there was another layer, the sanctuary. And that's where the priests who were assigned duties that day, according to the rotation of the 24 segments of priests, would go in on that day and perform their priestly duties. There were sacrifices every day in the temple. But then there was another layer. There was the curtain, the veil, and behind that was the Holy of Holies, where a priest went once a year with a rope on his leg and a bell on the rope, so that if he got into the presence of God and died, they could pull him out. Because you couldn't go in there to retrieve him, right? You weren't allowed. Only one priest a year who would go in and make atonement for the sins of the nation in front of God's presence. Now, since the time of Ezekiel, God's presence was no longer in the temple. That's just how it is. But the priest doesn't know that. I mean, they go in there fear and trembling, right? Because I'm the once a year priest who's come to make atonement for the sins of the people, and God might take my life for being in here this day. So there's a rope on my ankle and a bell. So what does it mean? The significance of the veil being torn from top to bottom. Hebrews chapter 10. We've now entered into the Holy of Holies. You, me, everybody, the whole world has the occasion to enter into the Holy of Holies, into God's very presence, like we just did when we were praying, or like we are right now through the veil of Jesus' body. That's the meaning. That's why the cross is so important, because it takes what would, up to that point in history, hidden behind a curtain, and makes it available to all of us. That is the presence of God Himself. Without that moment in history, Jesus' body being the veil, none of this would be as it is right now. We would not be coming to God in prayer in the way that we do. So everything about humanity's relationship with God is now different from this point forward. This fits so perfectly with the rest of the gospel. Think about this. I'm going to read this for you. In John chapter 14, Jesus says these words. He says, if you would know me, if you'd known me, you would know my Father also. And from now on you do know Him and have seen Him. Philip says, Lord, show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us. Jesus said, have I been with you so long that you've not known me? Philip, the person who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Look at what's just happened with the veil of the temple being torn and Jesus on the cross. It all stitches together. We've got the maker of the universe Himself before us on this cross in human form, paying the penalty for all of sin so that the way is now open. I mean, when you see how interconnected all this is, it just makes so much sense of all of it. All of the 1,500-year history of the Jewish temple rites, the priesthood, and everything that went along with it, all stitched together in this one moment of history where Jesus dies on the cross. Wow. And then Jesus says something. Now, in the text, not this text specifically, but in the other recountings of the gospel, it says, Jesus said, it is finished. That's actually just one word in Aramaic. If we were to translate it carefully, we would say, finished, from the cross. That's what we would say. Meaning what? It's done. Everything I was sent here to do has come to its point in history where it's done now. The veil is torn, and you and I do have access to God. But then Jesus says something else that is equally significant here. I don't know how you were raised, but when I was a small child, my grandparents taught me how to pray a prayer. They did. Now I lay me down to sleep. You ever done that? Pray the Lord my soul to keep. Little child's prayer. If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take, right? Jesus is praying the child's prayer on the cross. Every Jewish child was taught to pray, into your hands as I go to sleep, I commit my spirit. Every Jewish child. Jesus, this moment of intimacy is so incredible. Father, which nobody said of God. Nobody. Do you realize in all of Jewish history, 1,500 years, not once has anybody addressed God as Father until Jesus? Man. And then he says, the child's prayer, into your hands I commit my spirit. And he breathes his last. What a tender, tender moment. It's like Jesus is a child falling asleep in his Father's arms. Just as children did as they were raised up in a Jewish home. Well, this death already has an effect on people. People who are standing there are affected. Even this hardened centurion who's a Gentile. The Jew, you know the Roman saying, right? I'm here. No, I wasn't, I am, and I will not be. In other words, I'm just a machine. I'm here now. I wasn't before I was here. I won't be after I'm here. I'll be gone. This hardened Roman centurion is affected by Jesus' death and says, surely this was an innocent man. I remember when I used to take Jackson fishing, and I took Jackson fishing a lot. We went fishing more than I ever wanted to fish in my entire life. I never knew that I could fish so much and still hold down a job and be married. It's possible to fish 5 days a week and still hold down a job. I don't know if you know that. And then all day Saturday and most of Sunday afternoon. Well, when I would take Jackson fishing, I'll say this to anybody who asks, there was a fear involved for me. Because I've got this little boy, 5, 6, 7 years old, who's defenseless. I'm defenseless. I'm not carrying a weapon of any kind. And when we went fishing, some of the places, I never talked to Becky about this a whole lot, but some of the places we went, there were people there that were a little scary.
Yeah.
And I remember one time we went fishing at this one place. It was a private pond. A farmer owned it. But if you know, most farm fields have roads that go through them. You know, you got a field here, and a road between them, and it passes through the farm, takes you someplace else in the county you'd like to go. But the farm fields are separated by it. Well, we were on that road. There were 2 ponds on either side of the road, and we were in one of them fishing. And this guy pulls up in a van. Now, this guy looked just like, if I were Steven Spielberg and I wanted to craft a scary-looking person to be in a movie, this is the person I would have built in my imagery for a scary-looking person. I mean, he was wearing those shorts that come down about midway on your calves, you know. Had a wallet on a chain. He was covered with tattoos from head to foot. He had his hat on backwards. He looked to be late 20s, early 30s. He was about 6 foot 5 inches tall and was 260, 70 pounds.
Yeah.
He had a beard that was probably about this long. And it was rubber banded every 2 or 3 inches. So there was like a stick hanging there. And this is who got out of the van. Now I'm there by myself with a 6 or 7 year old boy. What am I going to do? I'm worried. I mean, I'll tell anybody, I hate to stereotype people and I hate to look at somebody and judge them, but I looked at this guy and I thought, boy, you know, I hope he doesn't mean us any harm because he's way bigger than I am and I've got nothing. So I felt obligated, not because I'm a good guy, but because I wanted to try to do something to diffuse this situation. I walked over and started talking to him. And this wasn't me. I looked, after talking to him for a few minutes, I said to him, I said, is there something in your life I could pray about for you? And this guy just broke down right in front of me. So there's something about the intimacy that we have, any of us, with God that breaks people's hearts. Just like seeing Jesus that day broke this centurion's heart. There is power there. Jesus said it himself, John chapter 12, when I'm lifted up, I will draw all people to myself. Right? So there's something to this. I remember Simeon, way back when Jesus was just born. He was in the temple on the 8th day for his circumcision, ritualistic circumcision. And Simeon says, my eyes have seen your salvation, speaking to God. You have prepared in the sight of all people a light for the revelation to the Gentiles, and for glory for your people of Israel. You just see where all of this starts to have a moving personal effect on people around who see it. And what does it tell us? It tells us, at least it tells me, that we have a relationship with a God who enjoys forgiving people. He wants to forgive people. I mean, look at the price that's being paid so that we can have that forgiveness. All he wants for us is, and from us, is a broken heart that wants to be forgiven. That's all he wants. And the forgiveness isn't to make him happy. It's because we really need it. He's doing this for us. So Jesus on the cross this day has accomplished something that could not humanly be accomplished in any way. None of us make ourselves clean before God. In no way. Just like the hymn sang. We sang with Augustus Toplady, no price can I bring. No good deed can I do that's going to straighten this out between you and me, God, because there's something on me that I cannot get rid of, and that's sin. You know, every person, I don't care who they are, how saintly they are, how young they are. Once we come to a place where we realize there's a moral component to behavior. I remember when that happened to me. I've told you all that story. When I remember when I found out that lying was wrong. Not just something you did out of convenience, but it had a moral component to it. I remember that. And we all come to that place where we start to realize there are things that are just wrong. And we continue to do them. You take something as innocent as driving through a red light. Okay, I've done it, you've done it. We come to that light, we're going along, we've got somewhere we've got to be, the clock's ticking, and we look up and the light turns orange. And we recognize that we got plenty of room. It's going to be a kind of a hard stop, but I got room. I can make the stop. But I think to myself, I do all this in my head. Okay, I know that when that light turns red, this one doesn't turn green for a couple of seconds. So nobody's going to come through the intersection and hit me. So if I'll just keep going, I'll be all right. The light turns red, I keep going, I go on my way, nothing happens. The cops don't come, I'm not serviced a ticket, there was no camera there, nobody knows that I ran the red light, I know it, God knows it. But it's an innocent thing. But in that moment I've done something now that running of that red light is now on me. I cannot get rid of it. It's done. If I offend one of you, if I wake up like I do so many mornings kind of cranky, and you happen to be in arm's length of me, and something you say or do offends me or troubles me in any way, inconveniences me as I quiveringly go to the coffee pot, I might say something to you or do something or collide something where I offend you in some way. I can never retract that. I might apologize for it, but I can't undo it. It's done. Nobody is alive right now who has not in some way defied their own conscience. They knew that what they were saying, doing, thinking, or being was not right. They knew it. We know it. And yet we've all done it. We can't get rid of it. So what are we going to do? Right? And if you then say, well, maybe there's a God in heaven, well, what would God be like? Well, He's perfect, but I'm not. What am I going to do? I cannot make myself perfect. I can't go back and undo the things I've done. I can't undo the things I'm going to do yet. This criminal that's hanging there with Jesus puts his sin on Jesus. He can't go back, and whatever got him hung up on that cross, he's not able to go back and fix. But he puts his sin on Jesus, and Jesus says, that's good enough. You can come with me. And he says the same thing to you and me. He offers every human being this incredible gift that we can just say, I want to be forgiven. How do I do that? Jesus makes the way. And we come to God and he gives us the gift. Right? And we're set free then from the sin that is on us, that we cannot shake. It's like, I heard it illustrated this way. It's like having dirty hands and you're getting ready to sit down for a meal and the only thing available is a bucket full of honey. It's not going to wash your hands. You cannot get it off. It's going to be there no matter what we do. So when we're set free from the sin that's on us, doesn't mean we're going to find a great life in this world at all. Doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that we're not going to regret our past. I regret my past all the time. Doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm supernaturally equipped to always make the right choice. I'm not. Doesn't mean that sin's not going to find me once again and stalk me and take me over. It might. It does. Right? On those mornings when I'm quiveringly going to the coffee pot and something happens that gets in my way, I sin. These scriptures are so powerful. Let me just read for you a greater portion of it. And this describes us, does it not? All of us have, like sheep, strayed off onto our own course. But the Lord caused all the sin we had to be laid on Him. Wow. So the gift of salvation means that I'm right with God no matter what I've done. Now that's hard to swallow. Ted Bundy, if he really repented, I can't know that he did. I don't know what happened between Ted Bundy and God, if anything at all. But he said that what he'd done was wrong, and he'd gone to God and asked forgiveness for it. That's all any of us can do. I don't care if it's nothing more than stealing a lollipop from the dime store. We cannot go back and fix those things, but we can come to God and say, because of what Jesus did, will you forgive me? And God will always say yes. Always. Think of two people, just two people in the text, in the scriptures themselves. You got David. Right? David was a mess. David was impetuous. He was given to do things out of the lusts and passions of his body that were just terrible, right? Bathsheba's taking a bath. Bathsheba's taking a bath. Isn't that kind of funny? And he sees her. Regardless of the fact that now there's a lot to explain, because I think she could see him too. I mean, there are no binoculars available. He goes and he lays with her, knowing she's a married woman, he's a married man, commits adultery. Now he's got an inconvenience because she turns up pregnant. And her husband, Uriah, is off at war, so it can't be him. What are we going to do? Well, let's have Uriah killed so it covers it all up. Try to get Uriah to come home and spend the weekend with her. Come on, Uriah, you need a vacation from the war. Come on home. I'm the king. I'm commanding you. And Uriah is such a good man. He says, oh no, I would never leave my post. I'm going to stay right here because I love you, king. Oh man, can you imagine how that felt to David? That Uriah was so loyal that he wouldn't even come home. And so David has him killed in battle, purposefully. So he's a murderer. Then you got Saul of Tarsus. Saul, how many people died because of Saul? How many families were there? They're sitting there in their home at the dinner hour, minding their business, and all of a sudden the temple guard burst through the door and dragged the parents out because they're followers of Jesus. And Saul feels like it's his mission before God to stamp out this way. And their parents never come back. These children are orphaned because how many times did that happen before Paul was converted? Before he became Paul? I don't know. Do you think Paul didn't regret that? Why do you think he says, I'm chief among the sinners? He remembers. But in both instances, Paul becomes the writer of most of our Bible, and David is a man after God's heart. How does that work? Because God loves to forgive. And he loves it so much that he was willing that Jesus should die on the cross to pay for that forgiveness. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything